Okay, so I'm recording. Um, so all of you brought some images, right? Or hopefully you did. If not, um, you can kind of follow along. I can give you the images that I have that I'm going to be using today, but I would encourage you to use a different model for your project. And if you want to search like Google or something like that to get you some examples or some reference images there, if you forgot something, or maybe your images aren't quite what you're quite the quality you were looking for. When it comes to reference, that's not copyright infringement. We're just using things for reference. You're allowed to look at things that exist and get ideas from them. Um, so, um, what I'm going to do before anything is we're going to talk about creating a new project, right? So in the past, I've given you already like completed folders. Like I gave you the maze. The maze was in a project folder. And I said just download the entire folder, right? The same with the bridge. I gave you a project folder and it had all the, all those images in it and stuff like that. Um, Today I'm going to show you how to make one of those projects. Okay, one of those, or at least one of those folders as it's structured. Okay, so we're going to do this wherever it is that you are going to be working from. So I would assume probably your hard drive. I'm going to go ahead and do mine on my desktop just for easy access for this really quickly. So to create a new project, I have a completely empty Maya scene. I'm going to go to File and Project Window. Okay. So you'll see that it's looking at that bridge folder. I'm just going to hit New, and I'm going to go ahead and put this on my desktop. You're probably putting yours somewhere else, right? Hit Select, and I'm going to name this Bottle. Okay. And hit Accept. So when I did that, you'll see that it created this new bottle folder, and it created all of the folders inside of that we need. Now, if you're working starting with that ball folder, that's fine too. You can just set your project to that, and that will work fine. But this is one of the days where we need to make sure we've set our project before we do anything else. And the reason for that is because we're going to finally start pulling images into here, and Maya's going to need to know the local path for that. Okay. So I'll show you what I'm talking about. All of those images that I'm going to use, I want them to be in my source images folder for modeling this project. Okay, so I'm going to go back, find those images that were up on the network again. Yeah, so I was saving them. Let's see. Marlowe. Okay, so there we go. So here's all my bottles. I'm just going to copy this and source images and paste. Okay. Now the reason I'm doing this is because I'm going to be referencing some of these images into Maya, and if you have these saved on your desktop, right, and you take this folder with you on your hard drive, and when you open it somewhere else, your desktop's not going to be there, right? Like you may have left them at home, whatever. You need these to stay local. More so, you also need that path to those files to be exactly the same, right? Because if you plug your hard drive in on this computer, it may recognize it as your G drive, and then you plug it in on this computer, and it may recognize it as your F drive, and you plug it in over there, and it recognizes it as your H drive, right? And so that means every time you do that, it changes the path, and all of your textures stop working, right? And so that's really frustrating when that happens. So I'm putting them all inside of my bottle folder here, right? And as long as my project is set to that folder, it will always find them in a specific way. So I'm just going to make sure, I'm going to go File, Set Project, click on Bottle, and hit Set. And so now my project is set to that folder. Okay. I always do this before I open a file or before I start creating a file. And that means that connection, Maya is recognizing that as the path to our project now without us having to, to fix anything. Okay. So the reason I put all those folders in my source images is because I'm going to use them to start modeling. Okay, so this is my front view. I've already sort of shown you. You can do that tap to full screen stuff. I'm going to go ahead and full screen my front view. Okay, so I'm looking through my front camera. Okay, and we're going to start by modeling the BioSilk bottle, right? So if I go in here and look, we're going to start with this one right here. I've named it Poly Bottle. And poly as in Polygon, not the female name Polly, right? So what we're going to do today is we're going to learn two different ways of modeling. We're going to learn some Polygon modeling, and then we're going to learn a slightly more, we'll say old school version of modeling called NURBS modeling. It still has a place in the world, but it's just a different way of modeling objects. And so we're going to learn both of them. Both of them have their reasons to use them, right? So this is the bottle I want to model from, right? And so I'm going to go ahead and go into Maya in that front view that I was in, right? And I'm going to click this button right here. It's in my viewport, there's this menu across the top, and then there's a whole bunch of icons, right? I'm going to click, it's the fifth one over. So it looks like a grid with a blue line or a blue plane sticking up from it, okay? And if you mouse over it, you'll see it says image plane, okay? This is a special kind of object that you can create in Maya. And it's special because it's going to continue to show a texture on this object no matter what viewport settings we have, right? So I can be in wireframe, I can be in texture mode, I can be in shaded mode, whatever. It's always going to show the image on that image plane. Okay, so if I click it, you're going to see that it goes to my source images folder. That's where I wanted it to go, right? And under bottles, I'm going to choose Poly Bottle, so that one there, and hit open. You'll see what I get is that image inside of Maya. Okay? And so now I can use this as reference for my model. Okay? Now, sometimes people don't pay attention to how I did this, and they try to add it in their perspective view. So this is an object. I'm just going to go ahead and delete it. Show you what happens if you add it in your perspective view. Because we can still do that. We can click here and go to Poly Bottle. And when I do, it's going to put it in there. But when I move my camera, it's going to stay aligned to my camera. Okay? That's not necessarily what I want. So I hit Control Z. I want it to stay in the world like another object. I want to be able to tumble around that. Yes. Yes. Set the folder that has your. Okay, yeah, maybe you're good. Okay, go ahead and hit set. Okay, try that again. So it's still taking your name. Okay, work. Okay, cool. And so you want the images you're going to be. No, just in the source images. I mean, you can put it where you want, really. So, I always put it in source images because that's just where it goes. Again. The question about where to put the textures, I put them in source images. You can create a completely new folder in there if you want to. The biggest thing is it just needs to be under your bottle project folder. So, again, in my front view, I click this image plane button, and I'm going to go ahead and choose Poly Bottle and hit open. Now, if you notice, the image plane is an actual object in my outliner, right? This isn't just like a background texture or something like that. This is something that I can grab, I can move it around, I can put it in different locations, right? And so that's what I'm going to do right now. Because what I want is I want this bottle to line up with my grid pretty symmetrically, right? So I got this thickest line right here. It goes right down to the middle. I want that to like sort of be the midline of my bottle. And so I'm going to go ahead and move this around until that's the case. So I can do something like this. Right. Maybe rotate it a little bit. So let's get in here a little closer. And then move that up. So it's kind of hard to be exact on this. One of the things you can do, this is kind of how I do it, is I look at my grid and I see like my lid here. You'll see that it's just a little under 2 units on each side, right? And then if I look at the bottom, I have like 3 to there, but like 4 to there. So that means it's probably not rotated correctly yet. So maybe more like, a little bit more like this maybe. Right? So I may not get it perfect, but I want to get it close, right? The other thing you'll notice is that in my perspective view, it's still right in the middle, right? So if I were to create a new object here, you'll see that it's like right on top of my object, right? So what I usually do is I grab that image plane and I kind of move it back just to get it out of the way in the z-axis, right? So by doing that, it's still going to look the same in my front view, right? But it's going to be kind of out of my way in these other views. Okay. Now, this means now I have something that I can start using as a reference to model. Okay. And this is going to be really beneficial in terms of proportions. If anybody, how many of you have tried to draw a human before? Right? Did you end up with like a human that had really tiny arms and like a giant head? Like that is the biggest thing that most people fight with, is learning how to get proportions and scale and shape and all of that stuff correct, right? We're okay at it, and there are tools you can use to visualize that. But if we're just working right on top of our reference, then we don't need to use those tools. We can use that and like line up our model to it, right? Now this reference can be any image you want. Right? If you have a bottle you designed by drawing it, you can bring your drawings in here. If you have a character you designed by drawing them, you can bring your character in here. You have a creature, you can bring it in here. This is all for reference to help you get a 3D model that is closer to the actual design, right? Okay, so I'm going to start making an object in here now that to kind of line it up and sort of fit it to this bottle. Okay, I'm going to show you a few new modeling tools, but a lot of these you already know. One of the things I will also say, I'm not limited to one image plane, right? If I have a nice side view, I could also put that side view in there. It would take a little bit of work to get it lined up to where it's correct. But if you have like a character that's like, proportioned differently from the side than, obviously than they are from the front, then that extra reference image may be helpful. In the visualization class, you all are probably doing character designs, and you are drawing them on that like character design sheet to keep everything lined up. That's why. It's because you can bring those 2 images in here, and now you have all the angles you need to be able to start modeling your character correctly. Okay, so let's start making an object to work on in here. I'm going to start with a primitive. The question for me, and the question that you kind of have to stop here and think of, is what is the best primitive to start with, right? So there's a couple of options. We could start with a cylinder. We could start with a cube. We could start with a sphere. What would you go with? Okay, so we got one vote for a cylinder. So for this bottle in particular, What would you go with? So it's kind of flat on the sides, even though it's got some roundedness and some shape. So for me, I'm going to start with a cube. I want to start with something boxy. And instead of taking a rounded object and trying to flatten it out like a cylinder, which we could do, and the cylinder wouldn't be that far off, I'm just going to take a boxy object and try to round that a little bit, right? Again, your bottle though may be more cylindrical, and a cylinder may make more sense, right? So I'm going to start with a box. If I just click this box button, it's going to create us a box in here. Actually, let me redo this here. So I'm going to go create polygon primitives, cube, and at some point I've changed a bunch of these settings. So I'm going to go edit, reset my settings, hit create. And so it made a box, right? Now this is why we use an image plane, is because if I hit 4 for wireframe, my box is going to go into wireframe mode, but I'm still going to be able to see this texture in the background, okay? And that's a really beneficial thing. And if I hit 5 or 6, I'll still be able to see that background. So what I want is I want a box that already has some of the geometry I need to be able to get this shape out of it, right? So it's pretty tall, has a lot of like points that are sort of pinching in on the side, right? So I know that it would probably be helpful if I had a couple of spans along vertically. Like I need extra vertical spans, right? I'm probably not going to go crazy and put like a gazillion in there, because then I have to edit all of those, right? But I'm going to add a few extra just so I can start getting that shape a little easier. I usually also like to add a center line here, at least, so I can make this thing kind of symmetrical. We have a symmetrical object here, and if this thing were really complicated, I could just model one side and then duplicate that side and have both of them, right? So I usually like to have a center line for that reason as well, and I'll probably do one for the other side as well, right? But if I were to hit 3 on this to smooth it, this is what I'm going to get as my smooth preview as it is, right? If I hit 1 and go back to unsmoothed, that makes sense. So if I start adding additional subdivisions in this, my smoothing is going to work differently. So I'm selecting my object in my channel box. I'm going to go down here to this input, polycube 1, and I'm going to add some subdivision height. All right, so maybe add, I'm going to try like 5. 5 seems like a pretty good number. I'm also going to add at least 1 for depth, maybe 3. No, let's do 1. And then for width, I'm going to add 3. And the reason for that is because I think that there's some volume I'll need to retain. Now, if I hit 3 now on this object, this is how it smooths, okay? So this is important to recognize. The reason it smoothed as a sphere earlier is because there was very little detail information in there. There were fewer spans, and Maya just rounded everything, right? And when it was a 6-sided object, it just rounded it into a sphere, right? Well, now we have way more faces in this, and what it's going to do is it's just going to round these corners, right? So this is how box modeling works. This is how we can kind of get the amount of detail we want, right? So I'm going to go ahead and start scaling this now to sort of fit the shape of my bottle. So from the front view primarily, and again, I'm just doing that, tapping the space bar to bounce back and forth into different views, right? So for my front view, I'm just going to kind of scale this and get it relatively close to the shape of my bottle. And then from here, that's too thick, so I'm going to go something like this. All right. All right. So, oh, just when I added, I just added that division line there. So I'm not really going to do, I can show you how to do some symmetry. We may actually look at that here in a minute. But right now, like this one's kind of simple, so I don't necessarily know if it's needed. Yeah, let's go ahead and look at some of those though. So when we move an object, that's a tool. Like the move tool is a tool, right? And like many other tools in Maya, there are settings for that tool, right? So that's what this little button is up here. This little hammer with these 3 dots. This is your tool settings. I'm just going to sort of lock mine into place over here on the side window so we can see it, right? And you'll see that currently I'm on the scale tool. But if I go to my move tool, here's all of these move tool settings, right? So I want to show you a couple of different settings that are nice when we're modeling. One of them is this soft select, and one is symmetry, okay? So symmetry is going to work pretty well with what we're doing here. If I click on this symmetry setting, I can choose how I want to be symmetrical on this. Now, when I'm just moving my object, it's the whole object. This is going to apply more to editing the sub-objects. So I'm going to go to vertex, right? And in the front view here, right, if I choose the symmetry line to be my object X, okay, that means when I grab something on this side and move it, it's going to move it on the other side, okay? So this is going to allow me to get a little bit of that soft selection and if I well, let me go back. That if I move these on this side, it's going to do the same thing to the other side, right? Now, this really only works with objects that are kind of symmetrically shaped. Like if you have a teapot that has a handle on one side and a spout on the other, you all know the song. That's not going to work so well because the vertices are not symmetrical, right? But this is a very symmetrical object, so I could now use this to go in here and kind of line up the way this works. Now, and at any point that I want to, I can just go under symmetry and turn that back off again, right? And so now when I grab a vertex on this side, I'm just moving it on this side. Right? The other tool that's pretty nice is this soft select tool. How many of you have accidentally turned that one on? Yeah. This one's actually pretty interesting. So what soft select does is it allows you to grab an area around, or it allows you to manipulate an area around the object that you have selected, right? So let me show you what I'm talking about. If I grab one vertex here and move it, you know, that's what I'm going to get, right? I'm going to get this. Let's go to 3D so you can see a little bit more. If I grab this one vertex and move it, I'm just moving that one vertex, right? Well, soft select, if I click that on, you'll see that now I get sort of this colored fall off around it, right? And it's going to go from like a hot red to like a light blue, right? And that tells you how much influence is happening there. Now if I move that one vertex, you'll see that some of the vertices around it move with it, right? The shortcut key for that is B. If you just tap the B key, you can turn that on and off. And if you hold down on the B key, you can make that radius bigger. Right? And so now I can manipulate my object like this. Okay, so, yes?
How do you select the vertices again?
Oh, if you just right-click on the object and go to Vertex, or Edge, or Face, like any of that, all of these are different sub-objects, and this will work with that. So if I go to Edge and I select an edge, it'll be a fall off of that edge too. And again, holding down B, I can resize it. Now these will work together. I can still turn symmetry on for this. And now when I soft select one side, it's going to do the same thing on the other, right? I'm actually going to turn off soft select and symmetry and show you how to do this if you just want to kind of go manual with this. So I can go to my front view, and I'm going to I'm going to go ahead and hit 4 so I can see through it, right? So this edge here, I need to sort of pull in on the sides, right? So I'm going to double click on that edge, and it's going to select the entire edge loop, right? If I double click it, it selects all the way around it, right? Now, if I were to scale that edge, it's going to make it the entire thing go in and out, right? But if I just scale in one axis, if I just scale on the x-axis, I can scale it in and out this way. So that's what I'm going to do is in my front view, I can just grab that edge and just scale that in until it kind of lines up with my model a little bit better. Right? Now, despite all of my planning, this model still isn't correct. I still need a little bit more definition in here. Right? So I did that edge thing. You can also do that with vertex. You can select all those vertices, scale that in like that. Same here. Scale that in like that. Right? And so although we're getting closer, this bottle still isn't quite right. Right? So I'm showing you some of these tools just so you can kind of learn to manipulate this bottle, whatever model you're doing. Right? And so don't think that this is like a step-by-step instruction. This is just a whole bunch of different tools, and how you leverage those, like there's a million different ways to model this same bottle using this same box, right? So the next step we're going to do is I need a little bit more definition. I need a few more edges in there to clarify this shape, right? If you look at the bottle right now, it's kind of smooth all the way down, but if you look over here, we get this like rounded part on the top, and then it goes in a little sharper right here. Like there's a little bit of a sharper point right there. So again, I'm going to go back to my front view and look at my bottle, and you'll see that it's not really lining up the way I would want it to, right? Now I can continue to scale this out and try to get something, but in the end, I just don't have enough mesh here to get the shape that I need. And so that means I need to add more edges. Now, I could have added just a whole bunch of them at the beginning, but I want to be as efficient as possible. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm just going to add edges where and when I need them. And the way we're going to do that is that edge or insert edge loop tool. So we may have talked about that briefly on the car. I don't remember if we did or not. But it's under mesh tools and insert edge loop. Now this one's really cool because basically all I have to do is click somewhere on an edge. Right? Let me go back to one so you can see. If I click somewhere on this edge and hold it, I can drag up and down and decide that, let's say, this is where I want to put that edge loop. Right? And when I release, I'll have a new edge in there. Okay? So this is going to allow me to go in there and just add extra mesh where I need it. And so I can do that from this viewpoint and sort of get an idea of where I might need some extra information. I'm also going to put something closer to the bottom down here to make that a little less rounded. Okay. Once I have them in there, though, they weren't really changed very much, right? They were all, I just inserted them. And so now I need to sort of manipulate those a little bit to get more information about this shape. So again, front view, double click on that, get that up there kind of close. And I can start to scale this in and get the shape I want. Again, scale this out. And again, remember when I'm scaling this, I'm only scaling in the X. I'm not scaling from the center because that would make it like a different shape. I'm going to go to vertex, scale these in just a little bit. Maybe pull this down just a little bit. And slowly you're going to start to see that this, I'm getting closer to this profile shape that I wanted, right? And even though it's not perfect yet, I have more detail in there than I had before. Okay. Now, something we can notice from this bottle is that if I look at some of these other images of it, it's not perfectly flat, right? You get a little bit of a roundedness here on this side, and even a little bit right here. But my bottle in Maya is much flatter, right? And so I need to sort of bulk that out a little bit. So again, I'm going to use my edges. If I double click on my edges here, I can scale an X and get a little bit more roundedness there. And then I can kind of do the same here too. If I want to scale that forward, make it a little fatter there. And then the same with these. So I'm able to start getting a little bit more of that rounded shape, right? And I'll also go ahead and pull this up just a little. We'll get a little bit of that rounded shape on the top as well. So slowly this thing's starting to take shape. And this is just, oh, it's not what I wanted. A little bit. And so this is just kind of how modeling works. Like we just kind of take our time and start getting the shape that we want. The last little thing I'm going to do is I need this stopper to kind of, or this top to kind of come up out of there, right? And so this is a little bit more complex. So I'm going to grab a few of these faces, actually all of these top faces, right? And I'm going to extrude them. So I'm going to do edit mesh, extrude, and then I'm going to sort of scale that toward the center. And I wonder if this will work. There's a, oh, it does work. That's interesting. Sorry. I've not tried this before. Interesting. Anyway, so I'm just going to scale this in and then sort of manually try to make this rounder, right? So it may be that I grab these. This may be a good opportunity to use symmetry. So do X. So if I grab that one, this vertex, start trying to make this shape a little bit more rounded. And then I may not need all four of those. I may be able to get it just with these four, just to get a little bit more of a rounded shape. And whenever I'm ready, I can just extrude these faces up again. Edit mesh, extrude, and start making my cap. Now again, this is getting a little lumpy there, so I need to work on that just a little bit. So now that's starting to look a little rounder, and again I can just continue to extrude out this face. Control E, flatten that even more. And I think that that's going to be good enough for what I'm going for right now, because in the end what I'm going to do is put a cap over top of this anyway. I mainly just wanted to get that shape kind of growing up out of it. So yeah, so now we're getting kind of a rounded shape there, and I still got a little bit of information to clean up here, maybe these vertices. Huh? Yeah, it does have like a yeah. So some of this is just continuing to nitpick it until you get a little closer to what you're wanting. And I may need some extra edges in here to make that work better. Like right now, those edges are kind of, yeah, it kind of helped. But I can maybe do insert an edge loop here and then flatten that out. And that may start to help a little bit too. So again, I'm just kind of eyeballing this right now. It's one of the reasons with modeling, it's a little slow. We have to kind of go back and forth until we get exactly the form that we're looking for. Yes?
Is there a reason you didn't just add a cylinder onto the top of that?
So I will. Like pretty much what I would do next is I just want that little part that goes up underneath the cylinder. So this is the question I get a lot. Like, how do you know when to continue to model from that mesh and when do you just make a new mesh and put it on there? And my answer is usually if in the real world it's two objects, then it's okay to use two objects. If in the real world it's one object, you need to try to keep that mesh contiguous. And so for example, like a human, right? They're not just one cylinder with two more cylinders shoved into the side of them, right? You'll be able to see that seam where they connect. The same skin that's on your chest sort of flows into your arm and goes down. And so for that, you would want all of that to be made up out of one contiguous mesh. I was just trying to get that little bit of part that goes up underneath the cap, because then we could actually just make a separate cap and sort of use that to use that from the front view to kind of fit on there the way we want it to. Right? So, wow, I was way off here though. That needs to be way bigger. And that's what happens when I don't look at my reference. So we can continue to model with polygons. Polygons in the entertainment industry is like 99, probably more like 95, 97% of all models are probably made with polygons, right? And the reason for it is even though there's a lot of like tiny little manipulating, right? It's very easy to quickly add more detail, right? If I needed a handle to come out of this thing, I could very quickly grab a face and extrude a handle out and do all sorts of crazy additions to this and still keep it all part of one contiguous mesh. It's a little hard to like wrap your head around what you should do in what order, but they're really easy to manipulate to have like low detail in one area and really high detail in another area, okay? So again, the vast majority of modeling is going to be in polygons, and the workflow now for most, at least most organic work, is that you take a mesh, or you take a mesh inside of ZBrush, and you sculpt a really detailed version of it, right? And then you bring that back into Maya to create a cleaner topology for it, especially for characters and creatures, right? But a lot of environment pieces or hard surface modeling you can still do inside of Maya, and you can still do characters in Maya, but programs like ZBrush and Substance are where you're going to be able to get that detail, like the little pores that are on your face. You don't want to have to model those, right? And if you did, your model would be so dense that you wouldn't be able to move it. So, so we can talk about that a little bit more later, but this is sort of the basic modeling workflow that you're going for. If this is something you enjoy, Todd, right next door, teaches a class called High Fidelity Modeling for Entertainment, or it may just be Modeling for Entertainment now. I don't know if the name's changed. And that's where you'll learn that high to low workflow. That's where you, can sculpt something in ZBrush, take that into Maya, turn it into a final production-ready model, right? Okay, so I'm going to show you. I'm just going to go ahead and hide this model. It's still a completely good model. I'm fine with it. But I'm going to go ahead and put it on a new layer. Right? And I'll go ahead and grab my image plane too. Right? And so in layers here, I'll just click this button. Now it's in its own layer. And if I click that V, it disappears. Right? So, as I said, the vast majority of modeling is done in polygons. Maya sort of divides all modeling though into poly modeling, you'll see that that's the tab we have open up there, or surfaces, curves and surfaces. And what that's alluding to is a type of modeling called NURBS modeling, N-U-R-B-S. Anybody have any idea what that stands for? Yeah, that's like that. That's that cheesy test question that doesn't really matter, but everybody asks it anyway. It stands for non-uniform rational Bezier splines. The word Bezier is probably one of the few words in that sentence that makes sense to you because you may have used Bezier handles in Photoshop when you were drawing your curves, right? And you click those little points and it would give you a tangent to adjust that, right? That was a way kind of early in computer graphics of understanding a curve without having to have a ton of data points, right? So think of computers back in the day when they were really slow at processing stuff. We wanted a really smooth curve, right? But we didn't have the processing power to have a polygon model that was subdivided into like, you know, hundreds of edges, just because computers were slow, right? And so NURBS was sort of the alternative to that. Instead of having a high resolution model, they would use a mathematically generated curve in order to make smoother models, right? I can tell that this information is very riveting to you. What you really need to recognize is that curves, as I said with polygon models, an edge can never bend, right? If you want a curve inside of a polygon model, you have to subdivide that curve and have more edges, right? That's not the case in a NURBS model. So let's go ahead and create very quickly a NURBS sphere, and you can see sort of the difference between a NURBS and a polygon sphere. So if this is a polygon sphere, I'll move it over. If I go to Curves and Surfaces tab here, this is a NURBS sphere. Okay? So the thing you'll notice about them, one has way more divisions in it, but if I get in here close, you'll notice that each of these edges are perfectly flat, right? And over here, there's way fewer edges, right? And they're curving, right? And you'll also notice that if I right-click on here, I don't get edges and faces and vertices, right? I get control vertex and surface patch and surface point, right? So this is made up of a whole different set of sub-objects. And if I go to control vertex, you'll see that it's like a vertex, except for it's floating out here above the model. And if I grab this and move it, it's going to sort of soft move this entire model, right? So this was like 1998. This was like top of the line, right? And that was before a lot of you existed. But this was where everybody thought the industry was going, and what really ended up happening is computers just got way faster and were able to handle way more polygons. But we structured a lot of modeling tools around NURBS, and there's still occasionally reasons to use them, okay? In the end, Maya is going to convert your NURBS models into polygons anyway. All render engines render polygon faces, and so when you hit render, in the background, Maya converts it to a polygon object, whether you modeled it in polygons or not. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to model our second model in NURBS, right? And then we're just going to convert it to polygons so we can add more detail to it if we wanted to. There are still reasons to use NURBS modeling. They're more precise in a lot of ways, and if you're modeling for some very specific technical standards, a lot of CAD software and stuff like that still uses some of the technology in NURBS. Polygons just allow us to get a better aesthetic result quicker. Okay, so, but again, occasionally there's some modeling tools you'll find in NURBS that are handy. So if I go ahead and delete this, we're going to model our Texas Pete or whatever that other model is using NURBS. Okay, so again, I'm going to go to my front view. Oh, let me go ahead and delete my other sphere here. I'm going to go to my front view. I'm going to bring in another image plane. And this time I'm going to do my hot sauce. Right? And hit open. Again, I'm going to sort of position this in a way that it makes sense. Why is it doing that? Close here. Okay. So let's try that. It's not perfect, but it's getting close. And again, the way I'm kind of looking at it is how it lines up with the grid. So okay, so we're going to go ahead and call it there, right? And then again, from my front view, I'll go ahead and pull this way back here. Nope, other direction, maybe that way. Okay. So just kind of off to the side here, I'm going to show you some of these tools for drawing curves, because a NURB object is really just a bunch of curves that are connected to each other, right? In the same way that we think of polygon objects, they're a bunch of edges that have a face that is built in between them. You know, this is just a bunch of curves that can be sort of connected together and make a surface, right? And so a lot of NURBS modeling starts off with making some curves, right? Like I can make a circle here, right? And I can go out here and duplicate that circle, move it over. You don't have to follow along with this. I'm just showing you this of like how it works. Duplicate that circle again, move it over. And the way NURBS modeling works is that if I click that, now I selected it in the wrong order. Let's try it this way. If I click this button here, it's going to loft that into a cylinder, right? And those curves that were used to make that still exist, right? So I can grab that and I can move this, I can scale it up, right? And I can kind of quickly like generate this NURBS surface out of those three NURBS curves, right? Now there's all sorts of different ways we can make NURBS curves. We can draw them, we can click them point by point, we can start off with a sphere or something like that. So for this bottle, what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw it, right? This is one of those modeling processes that's really kind of dull at first, and then when it works, you're like, wait, show me again, what did you just do? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click this. Actually, I'm going to lower my bottle down until it's more like that. There we go, so I can kind of see it across. So I'm going to use the EP curve, which I believe is this one. Yeah, EP curve tool. And what that's going to allow me to do is go through here and start clicking points and making a curve like this. Okay. And then when I hit enter, my curve is finished, right? And I'm also going to use some of the grid snapping features to draw this curve more precisely. So I want to start at the center point of my object. So I'm going to go ahead and go EP curve tool. And to make it snap to this point here, I'm going to hold down X. So X is snap to grid. You'll see that it kind of highlights it right there when I do that, right? So if I hold down X and click, you'll see that my first one starts snapping to my grid points. You may or may not be able to see that little tick mark there, right? And if I continue to hold down X, I can continue to snap these to this grid point, right? If I hold down Shift, it will sort of lock it vertically or horizontally. And so now I can go through here and start adding a few additional points like this. And so really all I'm going to do is I'm going to outline my bottle all the way up. also going to give a little bit of information here about this little lip thing that's happening. And then I'm going to go up underneath my cap. And then I'm going to go back down into the bottle, and I'm going to redraw the inside of my bottle because this bottle should have some thickness, right? If I want that glass to render correctly, it needs to have a little bit of thickness. Since I don't have as much information about the inside of the bottle, I'm going to be way sloppier on the inside of the bottle personally just to get this done. Oh. Bottom of my bottle a little thicker, and then again holding X, I can click my last one there, and I can actually move that vertex later to be lower. Another thing, oh man, another thing you can do is you can go in here after you've made that, and we can edit our control vertices to make this make more sense. And I just want that to not be quite so high up. So something like that. And so you can see now the shape of that object that I drew, right? Hopefully you can. To help you, I'll go out here into my perspective view, and you can see it as I tumble around, right? What I got is just sort of a profile curve of my bottle, right? Now, how I showed you earlier is like duplicating all that curve to loft it. We can still do that if we wanted to in order to get some of these shapes. But one of the really cool things about this is that NURBS have a Revolve feature. And so all I really have to do now is with that object selected, click this little goblet image here, and now I have my entire bottle. So like one button, and I was able to get that entire thing, right? This works with symmetrical objects that are radial, right? So your wine glass, your whatever. But if this had a handle on it, like had a little like, you know, like a little like, I think of like those little like whiskey jugs, like that has like that little bitty like finger handle. Like if you wanted something like that, so you can pour this, right? You can't get that out of the Revolve, right? It gave us something really nice, but this is a starting point, right? And so if I wanted to add more detail to this, I would just convert this to polygons, and we could do that. So I have a feeling some of you want to see me do that again, right? That's what I thought. Let's just. I'm going to go back to the point that we had the curve. So again, how I made this was just from my front view, and I used the EP curve, right? And just in my front view, I was clicking along the grid points. So if you hold down X, it will snap to a grid point. Right? So I was just clicking along my grid points until I drew out the profile of this bottle. Now, once I've done that though, the rest of it's super simple. I just grab that curve and I click this Revolve button. So it's under curves and surfaces. And I click that, and now I get my entire bottle. Now, this is a good time to talk about history. Not like, let's talk about World War II now, right? But like Maya's history, yes?
We use your what if the images come out completely black?
Okay, so if it did that, like it revolved it, but your model isn't gray, it's black. Is that what you're saying?
Completely black.
Yeah. So the reason it did that is it depends on the way. So let me repeat the process. Let me show you the process here so everybody else can see what you're getting. Because sometimes you'll get that. You all saw that when I lofted those 3 circles the first time, it gave me like this black cylinder, and then I did it again, and it gave me a gray one. Maya thinks of these curves as having a starting and an end point, right? And so if my guess is that you drew your curve on the other side, not like I drew mine on screen right, and you maybe drew yours on screen left or something like that. Oh, you did a screen right here. I don't know. It may have been like with the order in which you made it, like if you started from the inside and went out. But what's happening is your bottle is inside out, and so yours is completely black and not got this gray color to it. So I can make mine do that too, and I can show you by just the way we did it. It's the way that the curve flows. And so if we select this curve under curves, there's this option here that says reverse direction. And so that means that Maya's thinking of it as the other way. And then when I create it, I get this like, I can't see the bottle. But that's basically my bottle is inside out, is what it's thinking. And so light isn't interacting with this bottle correctly. So if you get that, all you got to do is undo until you have your curve and go to curves, reverse direction, and then it should revolve correctly. Okay, did that fix it?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So, and this happens, like, but that's just the thing to recognize is basically we're just seeing it inside out, is what we were seeing. Okay, so talking about history, Maya remembers how you made all of your objects. Right? Every time we click on something, every time we add a feature to it, every time we insert an edge loop, Maya remembers that. And we can go back and alter things that we did in the past, like maybe when we inserted our edge loop, no, let's not do that. Maybe when we smooth an object, we set it to smooth it 2 iterations, and then later we're like, you know what, we needed to change that to 3. That's how we're able to go into our inputs and add more subdivisions, is we're changing the history. Because that was the creation node, and we're saying now when we created it, we wish we'd have had more insert or more spans in it, right? So that means Maya remembers that this is a model made up out of that curve, right? And that curve is still an object in our scene, right? If I grab that NURBS curve that we used to create it, and I move that, it's going to change my bottle, okay? In fact, if I go in here and I edit control vertices on this, it's going to change the shape of my bottle, right? So just know that to get rid of that to where it doesn't do that anymore, if I select my bottle and go edit, delete by type, history, that's going to break that connection with that curve, okay? And now when I move that curve, Maya doesn't remember how that bottle got created, so it's not going to edit it. I usually delete history after I'm pretty sure that's how I want my model to look, because when that history starts stacking up, Maya gets really slow. Right? And so stuff like before I rig, I usually delete all my history. There's just certain times when you do that. Before I do that, though, I'm going to undo the deleting of the history, and I'm going to show you that I can convert this NURBS object into a Polygon object now. So I'm going to go to create or modify, convert, and it's NURBS to Polygons. Now, if I click that under these options, there are tons of different options, and I'll be honest, a lot of these, like, I could explain to you what they mean, and you'll forget it, and it doesn't even matter. Like the way to remember how to do this is just sort of memorize this process. So I always set this to quads, because you want it to be quads. And wait, or do I do general? No, I'm sorry. I do general. Oh yeah, quads, then general, instead of standard fit. And then per surface number of isoparms in 3D, I just changed this to per span number of isoparms. Okay, so the very last one on that drop-down list. And then I usually leave that at 3. So basically what this is saying is for each of these edges that we're seeing around there, that's called an isoparm. It's going to subdivide our polygon into 3 edges. And I set it to quads, meaning that when it does that, it's going to give me square faces instead of triangle faces. And so if you do that, and I hit tessellate, now I have a polygon version of that model. Okay? Now I still have my NURBS version too. And again, this is still connected in history because I undid that delete history. So that means if I move that curve, not only is it going to change my NURBS model, it's going to change the Polygon model that I generated out of my NURBS model. Okay? So what I usually do is I delete, because that's nice and all, but let's say I wanted to make my bottle, later we're going to make it bounce around, and I started moving this, then like, they're connected together, I can't make them stop, right? So I just want this to be completely new. I'm going to select my bottle and hit edit, delete by type, history, and so now none of that's connected anymore. The bottle is still connected to the NURBS one is, but my final Polygon bottle is not. And if I wanted to go in here and start extruding some faces now for some reason, it's a Polygon, so I can do that, right? So that's a lot to cover in modeling. I have another video, and I think I shared it. I'm not for sure if I've shared it yet in one of the other playlists, where I just go through a whole bunch of different modeling tools. There are so many different modeling tools in Maya. We have covered approximately 4 of them, and there are literally like dozens. Some of them are tools you'll use a lot. Some of them are tools you'll hardly ever use. But I have a video that I think is in one of the previous playlists I published. I think it's in the one for this project that covers a whole bunch of them. So if modeling is something you like, continue to pursue this, continue to learn some more of these tools. What I'd like you to do is by next class period, have your two bottles modeled, okay? We're only going to use one of them. I would encourage you to model both of them for practice, but we're going to use one of them next class period, and we're going to rig it up and get it ready to start animating. Okay, so we're going to be able to turn this bottle into, we're going to be able to deform it, bend it around, make it squash and stretch and jump, right? So coming in with a model that is something you can use for that is going to be very, very beneficial. I'm going to try to see if I can squeeze in a lecture on UV unwrapping. I feel like I can squeeze it in right now, but it would be very it would be very confusing and fast and like probably not helpful. So I'm going to go ahead and stop there, let you tinker around for the rest of class. I know we only got about 20-25 minutes left. Wait, does this class end at 4:45?
Yes.
Okay, that's what I thought. So we don't have a ton of time left, but that'll give you a little bit of time to continue to tinker around. And if you have any questions, I can chat with you. So yes. So that does happen. Is that there's a hole in the bottom of his? That's one of the reasons I snap it to the grid. Is because if you look at mine, like there's not really a hole in the bottom of mine. But if I were to grab one of these control vertices, if it wasn't perfectly lined up with the grid, I'm going to get that, right? And so that's the reason I tried to snap it to my, when I was creating it, I tried to snap it to my grid point here. Like that's why I was using X to snap it, is because then it's going to be perfectly at the center and it's going to revolve around that center point. And even though there is actually still a tiny hole there, it's so small that we never can see it. So, okay. Did that help? Yeah, I can help you in a bit here. So, okay. Any other questions or comments? Any of this? Okay. Again, I really strongly encourage you tomorrow night, if you can, come out to the portfolio reviews, or Thursday night. It's sort of divided between the two. I have a list of the names of the people who are going. If there's somebody you know who's in that and you're curious when they're going to be presenting, is there any specific thing you would like to see? If so, let me know. I can point out individuals who'll be presenting and tell you that would be a good person to come watch it. If you're really wanting to see some awesome animation, Forrest Blaze is presenting, I think, tomorrow night, probably like 3rd or 4th, and he's got some really solid character animation. So, but there's a whole lot of good stuff. So come out and check it out. Otherwise, class is yours. Have a great day. I'll go ahead and stop this video and upload it in just a minute here. So, okay, stop.